That leads us, of course, to John Cena, who was promoting last year's May of 2021, one of the Fast and Furious movies. And he said, I think that Taiwan is a country, right? He said that was, if I'm not mistaken, that's what he said.
That's right.
And man, did the hammer drop on him. Just for fun, we're going to play his little apology. It's actually in Mandarin, right? It's in Chinese.
Yes,
so
right.
Okay, listen.
你好，中国，我
memory
叫
lane.
希娜。我必须说，现在，在《速度与激情》中，我做很多。
All right, you get the picture. There he is. I'm sorry, self-flagellating. Boy, I really stepped in it. And I mean, most people back here threw up a little in their mouths watching him do this. Now, actually, having read your book, I have a little bit more empathy for the guy, because it's like, he was made to. I mean, there was no way he was going to get away with that.
You're absolutely right. And it wouldn't have been that much of a surprise if we saw the next 6 John Cena films never play in China. And not only that, but that the studios affiliated with those movies start to see larger corporate interests threatened in the country as well. And you're right. When I was reporting the book, I started to realize that, no, John Cena is not the first to run into this problem. It's happened many, many times. And now, actually, in fact, when Hollywood actors and actresses go to China, they're often sent with binders of what comments they are allowed to make. If certain topics come up, these are this is the wording or phrasing to avoid. Really, they've been trying to train actors and actresses to avoid just that problem.
Oh my gosh. All right. But enter Richard Gere, who's basically middle finger up saying, I don't care. And to his credit, I mean, he's like, I'm an American. I'm going to make the films that I want to make, and I'm going to take a stance. We have a clip of him. He was testifying before Congress? I think we have. Right. Taking a stand on this before a Senate committee. Okay, let's just listen to him.
I'm not allowed to go to China. I don't even know now if I'd be allowed in Hong Kong. I asked point blank to very well-known actress friends of mine, Chinese actresses, if I could work with them. And they said, absolutely not. Their careers would be over in China. They'd never be allowed to work again. I've had other circumstances with very talented Chinese directors that one was in tears with me, having to call me up and say that he couldn't work with me, that his career would be over and his family could not travel. So, I mean, this is personal to a lot of people.
So what was his original sin in the eyes of the Chinese?
It starts in the 90s as well. I mean, actually, it's interesting. He, starting in the early 90s, really became the Dalai Lama's #1 cheerleader in Hollywood and spoke out repeatedly about human rights abuses in Tibet and China's treatment of Tibetans, even interrupting an Oscar ceremony before that was cool, back in the early 90s, to talk about it. And he starred in a movie in 1997 called Red Corner about China's legal system. Certainly didn't make the country look good. And, but things hummed along for a while, and he was able to kind of balance that advocacy with his stardom. But then as China's box office started to grow at a clip, it was growing, 15, 20, 25% a year. He became radioactive to a lot of studios because casting such a public supporter of the Dalai Lama might mean your movie doesn't get released there. And at the very least, it just might create more noise than you want to generate and more questions and uncertainty than you want to have. So the last major studio movie that he made was in 2009. And when I started out reporting this book, I wanted to figure out if what he just said was true. Is it true that he has been blacklisted because of his public stance on Tibet and against China? And, everyone here in Hollywood, they can be really nice and generous, Megyn. And so some people said, oh, no, that's crap. He's difficult to work with. Or, I remember one person said he was getting John Travolta's sloppy seconds anyway. So some people kind of disputed that he's had this consequence laid upon him. But it turns out my reporting shows that it is true. I spoke to an executive at Warner Brothers who said, it wasn't like a memo went around saying don't hire Richard Gere, but the thought just became, if you can get someone else, just get someone else, because why take on that problem? And so if you really need Richard Gere to star in this role, let's have a conversation. But if you can call Michael Douglas, you can call Gary Oldman, let's get them on the line.
It really makes me want to do a crowdsource funding thing to get Richard Gere more movies right now so that we stand behind Americans who have the guts to speak out about these abuses, right? I mean, there's a reason that they go on for so long because the international community has turned the other cheek. They have decided we don't care about the genocide going on in China right now with respect to the Uyghurs or any of these other abuses that they've committed. And the blackballing, as you point out, okay, so maybe it's not expressed, but isn't it true that Brad Pitt cannot work in China? Like you forget. I mean, he's like next level. He's past Richard Gere on the banned list.
You know, it's interesting. It's always hard to say because really you just have to essentially see what Chinese authorities do, what movies they let in, what movies they don't let in, and see if a de facto ban has been lifted. I mean, Brad Pitt, that was back in the 90s. And, you know, it's interesting the juxtaposition of the two because Brad Pitt's movie 7 Years in Tibet came out the same year as Richard Gere's much more critical movie, Red Corner. And while Richard Gere was giving interviews far and wide, talking about why he thought it was so politically important to take a stand, Brad Pitt was trying to run in the other direction and say, you know, I'm just an actor. Who cares what I think? You know, don't bring me into this. And nonetheless, it took, I think, 15 years before he went back to China. He went with Angelina Jolie when they were married, and she was promoting a film. And since then, I have to say, it's probably for his career been a little touch and go. Now he's making the kinds of movies that aren't necessarily going to get into China anyway. I guess the question would become, you know, if he wanted to star in one of the big superhero movies, would this kind of rear its head again? Because over the past year, especially, we've seen Chinese critics of Westerners really ramp up. And it seems like no comment or, you know, history against the China is too distant to be rehashed.
To be punished. Can you speak a little bit about the business model of Hollywood right now? Because you expose that too, about there, you know, as a woman who grew up in the 80s and 90s, I look back and I think, you know, where are the fun rom-coms? Where are like the fun little things that we grew up with? Where are like the John Hughes type things? And it's all franchises, series, you know, superheroes, which is great if you're an 18-year-old boy, but I'm not. And there is I just thought they didn't sell here. So it was like, oh, I guess people have different tastes now. It's actually more layered than that. The Hollywood studios have basically sold out. And now all they care about is generating big box office. Like the art piece of it is kind of gone.
You know, I have to say, I don't know if this is any consolation, but you sound a lot like the studio executives here in Hollywood. A lot of
it's
them
not a
are
consolation.
Yeah, I think I know. Like, a lot of them are asking the same questions, though, which is where are the rom-coms? Where are the movies that we grew up with? Where are the movies that made us fall in love with Hollywood? And the fact is that they're just not good business anymore. I mean, if you were running one of these studios, I mean, per our earlier point, you're really running a corporate animal, and you have to make sure that you are sort of giving up offerings to the corporate gods. And increasingly that means making the biggest possible movies that not only sell ticket sales around the world, i.e. in China, but also sell toys, can, you know, service theme park attractions, can generate sequels and prequels and spin-offs. I mean, this is the playbook that's been established and really the one that everyone has to follow. Now, I will say, I think there's probably some refuge to be found in the rise of streaming. We've seen that introduce different kinds of movies.
Well, you got me excited about Netflix, and then you dashed my hopes about Netflix with the stuff about Saudi Arabia. So tell us about Netflix and how they've avoided the China problem.
Dude, I guess, I mean, this book sounds like it was a real emotional roller coaster for you.
It was just so illuminating. It just explains so many things that you kind of know at a gut level, but you haven't necessarily, at least I hadn't, taken the time to really understand, you know, how we got to this point.
I appreciate that. And you're right about Netflix, because Netflix several years ago tried desperately to get into China. The list of countries that Netflix isn't in is really quite small and illuminating. It includes China, North Korea, Syria. I mean, it is a real crew there. And China said, we don't want Netflix to come in because we have our own streaming services and we want to have some protectionist measures in place to preserve their business. And after Netflix pretty much figured out that it was a lost cause, it was not going to get into China, it did give filmmakers and producers there a little bit more license. And so that's why, of the few movies or documentaries that have come out in the past couple of years that present more of an unvarnished look at China or have plot details that Chinese authorities would not appreciate. They are often on Netflix because they don't have to have that same consideration that a studio like Universal or Paramount does.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.